Hello everyone, welcome to my channel English Literature with Sumi. So in today's video we are going to discuss about the Puritan Age or the Age of Milton that ranges from 1620 to 1660. This is a part of the History of English Literature series that I am doing at present, and if you have not watched my other videos related to this series, you can click on the I button and go through the videos. And if you like, at first let me tell you what I am going to discuss in today's video. Firstly, I'll be discussing about the introduction to the 17th century, then the historical background, the literary characteristics, poets of the period, prose writers of the period, and then the development of literary forms. So firstly, the introduction to the 17th century. This age can actually be divided into two periods, that is the Puritan Age, which is also known as the Age of Milton, which includes the Jacobean period after King James I and also the Caroline period after Charles I. So Puritan Age can again be divided into Jacobean period and Caroline period. And then there is the Restoration period or the Age of Dryden. But in today's video, I am only going to focus on the Puritan Age or the Age of Milton. Firstly, let us see the historical background. The 17th century up to 1660 was actually dominated by Puritanism and therefore is known as the Puritan Age. It is also called the Age of Milton because John Milton is one of the dominant representative writer of the period. The Jacobean period was actually the name given to the rule of James I, who ruled from 1603 to 1625, and Caroline period was the name given to the rule of Charles I from 1625 to 1649. The Puritan movement, it is actually considered as a second and great renaissance, which is marked by the rebirth of moral nature of man. So it is during this period that man began to realize his moral nature. The name Puritan was firstly given to a section of people who advocated certain changes in the form of worship of the Reformed English Church under Queen Elizabeth. King Charles I, who was ruling at that time, was opposed to this movement, and so Puritanism became a national movement as a protest against the tyrannical rule of the king. Now, as Charles I was defeated and beheaded in 1649, Puritanism came out triumphant and passed several severe laws. These severe laws include modes of amusement and recreation or banned, like the theatres, and an austere standard of living was imposed on the people. This set of rules was completely contradictory, as it were the Puritans who first advocated for the liberty and justice of the people. So it seems like they are contradicting their own rules as well. The spirit of the movement was religious, but they were not a religious sect. Often we make a mistake that the Puritans were a religious sect. Of course, they follow religion very severely, but they were not a religious sect. Now let us see the literary characteristics of the age. So there was a decline in high Elizabethan standard in several ways, like the output, especially in poetry, was very smaller, and in prose also there is a marked increase in activity, which is an almost invariable accompaniment of a decline in poetry. Then there was also a marked decay in exalted poetical fervor. The civil war that was going on, it actually divided the people into two factions, which affected the literature of the period, and the development of the prose, which took place from the previous ways, was excellent in kind, along with a development in prose style. And there was also a collapse in drama due to several reasons, like the opposition from the Puritans and civil disturbances. And one important thing to note is that Milton's greatest work, which in the Elizabethan period would probably have attained the stature of a drama, it took the shape of an epic. So these were the literary characteristics that was going on during this period. Now let us see who were the poets of the period. So, poets of the period can actually be divided into three major classes. Those are the Spenserian poets, including Phineas Fletcher, Giles Fletcher, George Wither, William Browne, and William Drummond. Then we have the Cavalier poets like Robert Herrick, Thomas Carew, John Suckling, Richard Lovelace. Then there were a group of important poets like the metaphysical poets, including John Donne, George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Henry Vaughan, Andre Marvell, and Abraham Cowley. And then there is John Milton, who is the greatest representative of the period. First, let us see who were the Spenserian poets. Now, poets who styled their writings after the school of Spenser, who belonged to the previous period, were known as the Spenserian poets. These poets include Phineas Fletcher, Giles Fletcher, George Wither, William Browne, William Drummond. Phineas Fletcher, his works include The Purple Island, The Locusts, Scythians, Britain's Ida, The Way to Blessedness, Joy in Tribulation. Then we have Giles Fletcher. His works include Christ's Victory and Triumph in Heaven and Art Over and After Death. Then there is Canto upon the Death of Eliza. Then an elegy upon Prince Henry's death, a description of Encolpius. Then we have George Wither. He wrote Abuses Stripped and Whipped, The Shepherd's Hunting, Fidelia. Then there is William Browne, who wrote Britannia's Pastorals, then The Shepherd's Spy. Then we have William Drummond, who wrote Tears on the Death of Meliadus, Ford Feasting, a panegyric to the King's Most Excellent Majesty. So, the majority of those poems are related to themes of religion. Now, let us see who were the Cavalier poets. Now, Cavalier poets are lyrical poets and they deal with subjects related to love and war. So, these poets include Robert Herrick, Thomas Carew, John Suckling, and Richard Lovelace. Let us see one by one what these poets wrote. Robert Herrick, his 2 volumes of poems include Noble Numbers and Hesperides, and both are collections of short poems, sacred and profane. In them, we could see that he reveals his lyrical power of a high order. His best known shorter poems are To Anthea, To Julia, and Cherry Ripe. Then we have Thomas Carew. He may be called the inventor of Cavalier love poetry. His poems were published in 1640 and they deal with trivial or sensual topics. His poems include A Cruel Mistress, A Prayer to the Wind, an elegy upon the death of Dr. Donne, Dean of Paul's, Boldness in Love, I do not love thee for that fair, To my inconstant mistress, etc. Then we have John Suckling. He was also one of the most brilliant wits of the courts of Charles I. His poems include Ballad upon a Wedding, Why So Pale and Vain, Phone Lover. These poems shows his tricky elegance, which is his chief characteristic in writing. Then we have Richard Lovelace. Now Lovelace and Suckling, they are often placed together as perfect representative of the followers of the court of King Charles I. Lovelace's Lucasta is a volume of love lyrics which is on a high plane than that of Suckling's work that I have mentioned here. Now let us see who were the metaphysical poets. The name metaphysical poets was given by Dr. Johnson in praise of the fantastic form of Donne's poetry. In metaphysical poet, we could find that their poetry is lyrical in nature. Their subject is usually religious. The poetic style that they follow is sometimes startling in the sudden beauty of phrase and melody of diction. There are also unexpected turns in language and figures of speech. So these are the few characteristics of the metaphysical poets. Now let us see one by one what works did the metaphysical poets wrote. Firstly, we have John Donne. 2 of his best known poems are The Storm and the Calm. Other poems include The Bait, At the Round Earth's Imagined Corners, Break of Day, Hymn to God, My God in My Sickness, Death Be Not Proud, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, Better My Heart 3% God, The Sun Rising, Sweetest Love I Do Not Go, etc. And there are many other poems. And among these poems, the most famous and the most read are the Valediction Forbidding Mourning, then Death Be Not Proud, 3% God. All these are very famous, and of course The Sun Rising. Then we have George Herbert. His first work is The Temple, which consists of 150 short poems which were suggested by the church. Some poems included in this work are The Church Porch, The Pilgrimage, The Pulley, The Gifts of God, The Caller, etc. Then there is Richard Crashaw. His best known work is Steps to the Temple. Other poems include A Hymn to the Name and Honor of the Admirable Saint Teresa, An Epitaph upon Husband and Wife, Christ Crucified, etc. Then we have Henry Vaughan. His books include poems Oler Iscanus, Silas Quintillans, Thalia Rediviva, etc. Now, next up we have Andrew Marvell. His poems include To His Coy Mistress, The Definition of Love, Bermudas, Upon Appleton House, The Garden, The Mower to the Glowworms, The Coronet, The Unfortunate Lover, A Dialogue Between the Soul and the Body, etc. And Marvell is specially known for his poem To His Coy Mistress, The Definition of Love, Upon Appleton House, and of course The Garden. Abraham Cowley, his best known poem was The Davideis. Other poems include The Mistress, The Pindaric Odes, etc. And one important thing to note about the metaphysical poets is their use of conceits. Sometimes the readers cannot find the definite meaning of the conceits that the poets use in their writing or in their poems. Now let us come to the most important writer or the representative of the period, John Milton. So Milton's poetry can actually be divided into two periods of his life, which were actually separated by 20 years. The first period can also be named as his early poems, which include works like Ode on the Morning of Christ's Nativity, On Shakespeare, On Arriving at the Age of 23, La Allegro and Il Penseroso, Comus Lycidas. The second period include works like his sonnets like On His Blindness, On the Late Massacre in Piedmont, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistus. Milton has a religious fervor in his poetry along with a strong bent for classics. So he is a great lover of classical writings. He is not only a poet but also a great innovator, as can be seen in his works. He shows excellence in employing meters in his poetry, and for this reason only he occupies a great and central position in literature of the period. Now I have not mentioned here in details about his work, but I'll definitely be making a separate video on the writers of the different periods, and I'll be discussing one by one about the major writers of the period, and there I'll be discussing John Milton separately. Now after discussing the poets of the period, let us see the prose writers of the period. So there were four important prose writers. They are Thomas Browne, Thomas Hobbes, Jeremy Taylor and Thomas Fuller. Firstly, Thomas Browne. His works include Religio Medici, Vulgar Errors, The Garden of Cyrus, Christian Morals. Now he is taken as the representative of the best prose writers of this period. Then we have Thomas Hobbes. His chief book was Leviathan, which expounded his political theories, his ideas regarding politics of that period. Then we have Jeremy Taylor. His works include The Liberty of Professing, Holy Living, Holy Dying. Then we have Thomas Fuller. He wrote historical books like The History of the Holy War, The Church History of Britain, etc. Now let us come to the last section of today's video, that is the development of literary forms. So there were two forms, that is poetry and prose. Now in poetry, there were different kinds of poetry that developed during this period. They are lyrical poetry, epic poetry, odes, dramatic and narrative poetry, etc. Now in prose also there were different developments that took place. Prose works like the sermon began to develop, then philosophical works were written by writers, and of course historical works were also developed during this period. So that's all for today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will be posting topics related to English literature, and if you don't want to miss the latest updates, do press the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that you could get the notification whenever I upload a new video related to English literature. So thank you. And